All right, well, we looked at this briefly in the other video that may come before and it may come after this one, but Shrek's house, in the movie, it's like a pile of mud with a tree on top, I think. In the musical, he comes out of his outhouse. I think in the movie, maybe he comes out of his outhouse. But they don't use, a lot of musicals don't use a house. And I don't think we wanted to do, I had started with the idea of it being an outhouse, but tucking the tree in next to it. I mean, the piece that we had was this rolling door that you can see used in other sets of mine. I built these over 5 years ago now. We use them almost every year. The double roller is Duloc, and the single is Shrek's house / the shelter that Fiona hides in on the other two sides. So this is sort of the vantage point when it's Shrek's house. We tucked a tree into the one side that from the front obscures the rest of it. And so I just had a piece of plywood there for now to get the idea kind of roughed in. And then I kept thinking about how to make a tall, thin mound of mud out of it. And then you really don't, I mean, this is really more detailed thinking than you might do, but you really wouldn't make a house by piling a bunch of mud against a living tree. It would kill the tree. I hate to say that came into play here, but it did. So then I started thinking, like, what if this is our biggest tree, but what if it was kind of small compared to the giant tree that sort of was the entryway to Shrek's house? Maybe it's a big stump that just goes up and it's a bit jagged here. So I just need what looks like the curb of a tree up here, and then it just needs to come down to a root ball. So I went and got the medium root ball template and just looked at it here. I was trying to get it to roll into, this is the clearance that we made. There's just a piece missing from this sheet already, but it's clearance I made to fit snugly to this shape on this tree. And so then from there, since it rolls away, I figured we just need a root ball shape like that. So I played around with the template on the floor until I got the piece of it that I wanted, made it out of cardboard. Then I made that piece out of some scrap double material that I had glued up for this project, and it ended up being OSB, which will work fine for this. But this I could put right up on there, 3/4 of an inch off the floor, and then we'll make some smaller, more reduced mod. Maybe I'll get the next, that's what I'll do. I'll use the next size down template, and I'll take about this much of it, and it'll sit all those lobes kind of back tighter, and I'll notch out to fit at about the same 36 inches or whatever here. And then we'll go to a piece of it. It doesn't have to be a perfect piece of a circle, but what looks like a circle from this vantage point overhead. And then we can do the same technique, the strips of cardboard rolled up and taken down to the edge here. I'll put an angle on this edge here, and we'll get the cardboard strips going all through there. Maybe do a little taping on those. We won't go in with glue and the felt on that, but I might do something just to homogenize that surface there. And then we'll put the same kind of bark texture or similar bark texture. And in the end, it should look like a bigger tree that broke off and fell down, and this, shooting off to the side of it still, growing in a group or whatever together. And it should go pretty smooth and easy here. We'll have to have a little something over here too. I might just put, just add a hemisphere or something to this toe edge of this, and then just take some cardboard up to like here, and then just get it to that beginning of a circle. We'll have to put something underneath, like you cut a square hole into the side of the tree to do a doorway. But overall, it should look pretty cool for what it's going to end up taking to do. And it's applying the same techniques that we're doing. Stuff like this goes quickly because I'm using framing techniques and construction techniques. I mean, relatively quickly compared to what it is. But these trees kind of ground along because I was inventing the technique the whole time. But now we've got that kind of on lock. It can be applied to a slightly different thing, but go pretty quickly. And so I think it's going to solve our problem here. So let's check that out when I get a little farther. All right, so Shrek lives in like a big rotten stump. So we use the same sort of techniques here. We had a piece that I copied over from the root ball of the medium tree, cut it out of some double thick OSB that wasn't going to be good for anything else. Applied that to the bottom of this rolling door frame that we've used in the past that I built years and years ago. I got some 3/8 plywood here. This was a good use for this. Luan was going to be a bit too thin, and 3/4 was not necessary. And so earlier in the series here, I was saying how this stuff is like hardly ever a candidate for anything. But in this case, slapping it onto the plywood ends of this door created some walls to different lengths 2 feet there, and I rolled it in to meet up with the tree that rolls up tight against it. So it's basically on the footprint of the door already. Over here we ran over so far that I ended up putting one of the negatives from the potholes for the casters under that edge by just setting it into a notch that was the right depth, putting a caster wheel under it, and then I screwed these in from below and then toe nailed them into one another, sandwiching that just to prop this up out here. And then I put some, I did a 45-degree angle cut on a 2x8 right there, and then I just measured the length of it. It was about 10 inches, so I went 10 inches this way and made a mark, connected it with a straight line, and cut that with the jigsaw to make these, they're 90 plus 45 degrees, so those are 135s or whatever. But they are working to hang this thin rip out in space. I have one at the top there, one in the middle. I'll just cut a square end on this one and set it against this and onto there at the bottom, and it'll hold this out at an angle. But it's created something here that is essentially, there's no framing in here, right? And so, and I'll make it, this is Luan's too thin, so I'll make it a 3/8 again or something. But then it's basically 2 sheets with no framing, and we're gonna either project or I'll just sketch like what looks like a big bush here on these 2 faces. And I'll get done with that, and I'll just cut like this hole out, but I'll cut all the negative out with the jigsaw and paint it black. And then we can just lay down some dark green leaf shapes and then some medium green leaf shapes in the sunny areas, and then finish up with some bright green, just highlight areas here or there. And it should end up being like a rhododendron or something with big leaves with big open negative spaces. And then we'll just put this is that landscaping cloth that I had hoped would work on the bottom of the trees, but it works as like a scrim material in the case. This is what we're going to do for the shelter. I never really liked that barn in a fairy tale universe. I guess there are buildings and stuff, but the idea of sawn lumber and all of that doesn't add up in my mind. So anyway, her being in shadow for her discussion with Donkey will be more like being in a big bush and dappled light and everything. And this will also give us a place to put a couple of little green gelled lights in there to just put her into green light, so she hasn't got to do green makeup or anything. And then on this outside corner, I could make 2 smaller pieces with just a big like bushy leaf, bushy projection, and apply it to, like, there's a 2x4 here, so I can just stick a 2x4 there, and so we get some natural dimension that way and hide the wheel. Maybe we'll even do it with cardboard. Just lay it out on a flat sheet of cardboard, and when we're done, just bend the cardboard and put a 2x4 on there and stick it. So you have like a leading bushy outcrop in front of the rest of the thing, plus the colors and the light that's happening, and then the edges of this can all get cut in a leafy shape, and we can actually go around the corner here with one of the openings, because we're relying on those blocks to suspend that thing. And without taking too much away here, it really doesn't change its structural aspects. Actually, this ended up being 1/2 inch. So anyway, we can make something dynamic and interesting with very little work that can hold itself up without having to like frame around all the openings that we intend to have and everything else. And then in the case of the rest of the root or the base of the tree look, what did we do here? I picked the arch of the tree by just digging around in what I had for negative things left over, and I had that big loop. I forget what that was from. That looks like, I don't think it's the inside of the base of the tower. I think it's more like one of the tree things. But anyway, it did mostly what I needed here for the top circular shape. The top didn't quite make it over to here, so I just threw another piece in and I was able to screw those down to the top of the rolling door. So that started what would be the tree, and I tucked it back so that it would roll out slightly to what we had to do on the ground for a root ball shape, because I know that that's the shape that I want to have happening. And I added just a hemisphere, half one of those negatives from the potholes onto that too, threw that little bevel on all of them. And then I just figured out what the dimension was. I put a piece of solid hemisphere. Oh, I put a piece of OSB up actually after that loop was on the top, and I just traced it. And then when I cut it, and then I slammed it down level with the door trim that was here. And then the bigger size, I was able to measure up from here to there. And it was about 9 inches or whatever. I ended up being a little light here. I was using scraps. Anyway, I made a straight up rip for both sides of the door and screwed it into the trim, and then out here where the feet of the door with wheels in it roll out, I could get in there with some screws, and that's totally good enough. So we just had an overly long sort of plywood opening. And then once I threw a bent piece of plywood on here and got that kind of general shape, I just scribed that line, jigsawed it off over here. Didn't need to, because it's short of it here. It's about equal here. And if anything, it sits back some there. So you can play a little jazz here, no pun intended. But to just get that opening to happen enough, you know, so that the door comes through it, no problem. Right? And then I grouped some things with that ram tape again, just to make sure that we pull those negatives in and get some good root stuff happening. Over here we had to do a kind of a clever maneuver, because the other full tree rolls in here, and so this goes from being pulled to the outside to flipped under and going in that direction. And then I wanted to roll around this corner, so I got in there with spray glue and applied just a long kind of couple pieces of cardboard to maintain that the surface rolls around into there, and so that other tree fits in there real good. And then these are two of those grass skirts, just as we made them for the trees. I just did the one, and that's why I mounted the root ball that was a bit reduced by eye, and that's where a little eyeballing has come in. There's like a bulkhead root ball shape in the middle section here, so that we could do the grass skirts the same way, and get two sets of them out of one full sheet, given the way that the corrugation goes. And so those went on, and then the top overhung them except for here. And this is why I didn't bother to reverse this, but I would have if it was over on the front of this piece, because you get, no matter what you do, I tried blending it with tape here, you just get a highlight. And so I'm just going to keep the paper real loose here to obscure that leading edge. And in the case of these, I just hacked them off at different levels too, in case they show up in there. It's not one smooth straight line that betrays the fact that this is a construction and not a homogeneous piece here. Same with those, I hacked at the bottom of them, and those just ended up being left over curved from doing the outside edge of the tower here. So whenever Don rolled the whole full sheet up and put it up, and then cut the extra off, and so there were some slices left, so they fit this curve nicely, and I turned it around and it fit the inside of that one nicely. In fact, the negative from cutting some of these went up in this spot here, as you can see, get a little bit of gaff tape. I like to do that because you might get light coming through those cracks under the paper. So I use getting sound cues together today. So in general, I'm going to do the same twisting operation on the paper to give it that bark texture. Slam it up with spray glue. We don't have to put felt on this because we're not trying to keep it for the long term. And so you can go right from this to paper yourselves if you're just making trees or tree shapes in the short term. But this is going to be two sides tree trunk Shrek house and two sides bush shelter. Okay, have I said it enough times? I fear all the time I'm too redundant. We'll get it sprayed all black, and then the extensions for the trees, we got those up yesterday too. And so the nice thing about that is, rather than, I will be crinkling the paper to cover it the same way, but I'll do it so that it's running like this. The crinkles are going this way because it's 24 inches wide and we only added 20 inches. And so rather than 5-6 pieces to do that, I can just crinkle it all up and gather it in a group this way, and then make those repairs wrap them. In fact, what I might do as well, it would probably be worth doing, is carefully ripping an inch off of either edge. Anything to break up that perfectly straight line, and then, or you know what, I could crinkle it all up and then just take a couple scissor chops at the edge of the crinkled up group, so that it's not, and you could do that actually, this whole thing, it would be helpful. It would create blend edges like that. So anyway, they'll run down onto this without making a horizontal seam up there and between that and being careful to put it down with the spray glue to get the texture to come together more better. This is again the stone side of these. So anyway, we'll get that extended on all the trees today. I'll get the bark on the front of this thing today. We'll cut up the leaf shapes here, and then there was one other thing that I wanted to paint black. We'll paint out the roof is up there, and we got the shingles on that, so I can run that all in and lay it on the floor on the tarp. Anyway, all that stuff will be blacked out after rehearsal today, so it can dry overnight, and things look okay for pictures tomorrow. And then with a little bit of dry brushing on it all, it'll really pop out. And that way we have all the tree stuff to do at the same time, all the different browns going at the same time, all the tarps laid out and to protect things at the same time. And then my intention is to come back to these more man-made pieces, and we're going to put stone textured paper on the front of Duloc. I'm going to leave it long here, so when those towers come in, they fit pretty well, but if it's just got a gaskety paper edge on it here that's finished, it'll skirt that opening real nice. And what else did we do here? Oh, I'm taking the overhang off flush on the cathedral side, and I'll put bullnose halves of pipe insulation on all of that. And oh, the trap door, he's in there. He came out of one of the triangles left over from fitting the top 4 pieces of I think we said that when I was doing that, putting the surface on this thing. Anyway, he needed a piece of a circle, obviously, to clear the fog machine. I wanted a hole in there because otherwise you can't pick it up out of here once it's latching. And I had to take the corners out because given the thickness of the trap door, you've got to be able to clear there. So it couldn't be any more of a triangle or it gets jammed up against the face of the frame. I used a hole saw, but you don't have to do that. Or whatever you're doing. And then a little bit of piano hinge. I used some real nice long, these are 3/4 of an inch or more. These are half. I didn't want 3/4 because the material is, and I didn't want little sharp guys digging his back when he slides down in here. But I wanted plenty of them in here so that between this edge that's left out here, it's well supported. Oh, and the end of it's long over inside, and so we'll put like a gate latch on, so once it's fully down, it can be gate latched from inside, and it won't be flipping up as a tripping hazard. But stepping over here doesn't actually cause it to fall in, so there's no worries of it falling down, that's for sure. That's not me, that's the sound effects. So anyway, it'll pin down tight. And they can also open it for him from inside by pulling on the back edge. And essentially, once he's going through the hole, it'll stay open for him. And so all in all, it can be run. I was thinking it would need a string through a hole, and then it'd be something you're trying to hide. But this way, you can't really see it at all. Hopefully, I got one more handrail upright thing, balustrade thing to put in, and then we can run the PVC through that bad boy. And I feel like there's something I'm missing. Oh, we're going to get the zebra out here, too. That we weren't able to get an inflatable horse, but we got an inflatable zebra. And we will use, I'll black him out as well, just to try and knock, whether he stays a black horse or not, we'll put a black base coat on him. But I will spray him with Super 77, just kind of as an adhesion promoter. So even after a few days, if the paint gets pretty brittle and is cracking up, those flakes won't be falling right off, hopefully. Nothing worse than that thing showing that it's a zebra underneath the paint job halfway, even if it's like Saturday and I've got to stop what I'm doing and repaint it or some crap. Especially then, because if it's starting to fail, then you haven't done anything, then you can't quite get all of it off of there cleanly to repaint it. And so we'll just put our best foot forward and make him sticky first to begin with. But it's that time of the week. Everything is partially finished. I got to get back to work. Well, Katie got our 2 small and 2 medium trees. Got our bark texture extended on there, being careful to sort of blend it in where she could with the existing texture. The Super 90 works good for putting this paper down. It would probably work good to use Super 77. Super 77 is great for paper, but it isn't a long-term adhesive, and I've had it like over time let go. So, but in these real feather edges, you really can't beat 77. It's just, you can hold it up with a gloved hand and mist in this general area, and everything becomes sticky. And so it needs the 77 before we paint that out, and it needs black gaff tape that I can't seem to find. I need Super 77 to like adhesion promote this thing. And we haven't, I guess the problem is we haven't got Super 77. I don't want to run over to the hardware store and back. They're probably closed by now. Today's a 14-hour day, I think. So it's after 11, I think Lowe's is closed. So tomorrow morning we'll do that. I brought the roof in and got that blacked out as a base color or a base coat. And then the shelter in our show, I see a lot of shows use like an old structure that's falling down, but like I said, I've got these pieces of plywood kind of connected so that I could cut a lot out of here. The problem with this sheet, we looked at it earlier in the series, is that it's splitting. So I glued that all up with construction adhesive, which is dripping out of there now, but I'll do that tomorrow. And threw a clamp on there on everything. Then I realized the clamps are on there and they're in my way, so I just painted those too. So that's just what happens when you have to move, man. And Shrek's house, I got the paper on there, Used cardboard strips on the sides to get the bark or the trunk shape, and then just curved cardboard on the front with that jagged cut, which is sitting out now, but I think I kind of like that. It gives it a little bit more style. And then generally speaking, just blacked out around everything up here. I ran over to that corner with this 2x4. It's not necessary per se. It adds strength for incidental things. This piece, believe it or not, has to zoom and be stored in both wings over the course of the show. And so these points and stuff are like, gonna potentially grab into the legs. So these guys will have to be careful of that. And this one in particular is like a head stabber. Oh, man. So first thing tomorrow, I'll finish blacking things out. The trees will stand up and that wet paint will stay out of our way. The roof will fly out and that'll be out of our way. I'm gonna get the bottom of it painted so that can fly out after that and not be in my way. The zebra can just sit somewhere out of the way while he's drying. And then I'm gonna lay the 2 big trees down and get the tree texture on them, texture paper on them, and spray those black as well tomorrow. Because we've got photographs, set photographs, or I'm sorry, the show photography and the cast and crew photography a couple days before opening night. So things aren't normally complete, but I'm not happy with the sonotube and stuff like that showing, so I'm gonna get that paper and everything down. So that'll take me most of the day. Then I can't work on anything because it's kind of like a show in a sense where I'm not running in and out of the stage. I don't want to make power tool noises and the halls and stuff. The lights will be off. I do have to try and he can get in there, Farquad, but I really should move this back a couple of inches. This arch is concentric to the base right now, and the width of this wall, I wanted 3-sided walls on both faces of this thing, and the width of this wall was a product of the 4-foot circle that somebody else turned into the director. She painted out the stained glass window for the cathedral at 4-foot diameter. I can't remember how many times I've said this in the series, maybe not at all. So we got the window there, but I can't trim it any smaller as a circle because there's only a little bit of white space at the outside, and then the F would be too tight in the circle. So that wall had to be a lot wider than on this side where it's more balanced. And then when you put those 2 surfaces in here and you keep them concentric to this and you get enough of an angle tipped on those walls, anyway, it ends up about so thick. And so we were squeezed here against the framing, and so now he just needs a little room. So I'm going to take that assembly and just slide it over. You'll never notice it's out of center, but I wanted to start as a best practice. And then this piece here, like we looked at before, I got the hinge on there, and so I'll have to just back that up some. Although I think the way that I built that leaves me the flexibility to continue to move that piece and reattach the hinge at a new location on the flap, whatever you want to call it, the door thing itself. I got to finish up the trim job. I got to put foam trims, crown under this and bullnose on the other side. Put the other upright for the railing system in. So lots to do. And then I got to get the paper and stuff up on the front of Duloc. As well as I think I'm going to put that crinkle paper on the fabric thing that we're going to fly in for the Duloc tower that grows. I got to make the crenellation top for that. All kinds of stuff here. But I'm going to try and get through getting things black painted and letting them dry tomorrow so that if there's stuff rolling around that isn't finished, obviously, it's basically black or base coated. So, all right, keep plugging away. Today's Tuesday. So I got tomorrow from as early as I get here in the morning until about 4 when I got to pack it in. And then I can work on maybe the bird and the fire, special prop type things. I can quietly work on those in the back hallways. So I'll work beyond 4. I'll work to 7 or 8 at least tomorrow. And then Thursday is a black, no rehearsal whatsoever, give everybody a break. So I'll be here as early in the morning, and I'll work to put this probably 9, 10 at least at night. It's 11 today. And then Friday I'll come in ass early and button things up, tiny little fiddly things, and try to be basically cool with an hour or 2 to spare. Time enough to put a tie on and wash myself up. Then I got to put Shrek and Donkey in makeup for opening night, so not a lot of time left. Time's a ticking. And we got all these quick change magnet things. My magnets came in the mail today here from Amazon, so. All right, we'll come back and look at how that stuff shapes up before opening night. Okay, so I know I covered this briefly before in theory. I'll show you what I did in here. To start with, every one of these panels for these 3-sided walls on both front and back sorry, too close, are geometrically equal, symmetrical, and rather square. And they were assembled to the bottom and the top were all flush as a group all the way around in this like bow tie kind of footprint. And then they were attached to the floor, on the floor exactly aligned to the center line here and over there. And this is how it was designed in CAD. And so these 4 sides that head off the arrayed joists in here created a situation where we put our sheets on the floor, set to those, and pushed out and had enough to cut a curve on. And then our leftover made our trapdoor. But we ended up having too narrow, time you add a half or a quarter of an inch of luan to the wall, and then 3/4 of an inch of trapdoor behind you, it's another inch encringing here. And so, again, the wall had to be so wide for the artwork that goes on it and whatever. However, in the design, in agonizing over what exactly we would do here, I tried to set us up for success and for changes specifically. And so today all I had to do was pop a few screws loose. The framing braces in here needed to come loose quick, these 2 angled guys, and they control this unit for square, so they still had to be disconnected. I slid it back to 3 inches after I traced it on the floor so I could just measure and see basically that I had 3 and 3 there, that I was on the center at the back still, which is the center on the framing from putting the stud on, and the seam in the floor, and as well as the dimensions on the outside to the outside edges too. I just checked that, which is like just best practice stuff, not completely necessary until you're really out and off, and then it looks wacky from the house. And so the next thing was to reattach to the floor, have the outside 4 corners checked for level. This is a little bit of a looser check because we're on wheels and we're on a weird surface, and then I just had a guy push on there while we tied up the framing. I'll reskin it and we're all done. The last piece is the trapdoor. Now the heel of it is hitting that beam in there. However, no problem, it's got to scoot forward 3 inches anyway. The piece itself will go right back to where it was before. Basically, it'll register in here, and the back edge of it will just clear that beam where we'll mount a gate latch to hold it down, and everything will work just as it used to, just as soon as I just pop those 2 screws out of the hinge and slide that panel forward, which makes this change. This all happened, plus my video about it, in under half an hour. And I think you could probably get it done in 30 minutes, or excuse me, 15 minutes. Half an hour or 30 minutes. So, cool. We'll see ya. Well, karma's a bitch. If you don't take the door panel off first, in this case, you can't get a screwdriver on any of those screws. So we're gonna have to slide this back to where we used to be. I'm gonna trace this thing right now because I did a little messing around to put it in this location. So I'll trace it as well here. I'll slide it really quick, pop the door first, go back to my scribe line, lock it up, and then I'll put the door back in. So it's going to take a little longer since I thought I was so smart. Alright, well, the lovely Miss Merrill is going to show up later to paint my castle doors. So I'm getting the stone wrinkly paper up on the front of Duloc. We got the biggest trees, the bark side, finally got paper on it, got some paint. I've been careful to set them on the 50-50 line, and I'm going to have to make my peace with it just being an overspray sort of dividing line. It's probably for the best rather than a crisp line, and I may do the same sort of thing here on the sides where the 2 different colors of the castle occur, because it's sort of, the gradient will disappear in the different lighting that we have, and you don't have to pay as much attention to a crisp vertical line, which can be done. I think that I'm going to try to get the 2 sides that you see of the railing uprights on the cathedral side to be white, or the Duloc colors, and then the other 2 sides that you see from the Fiona side to be black. So I'm getting that roughed in right now, and I'm realizing if we're doing the wrinkle texture up there, it's all got to be wrinkle texture here. I had some MDF casing, window and door casing, like super chintzy. I brought it in today. It'll do the bend, and so that's the best case scenario for MDF casing. You'd never use it in a home renovation unless you were a super cheap, low rent flipper. So I'll put it along the bottom to give this thing like a chin. And again, I got to get that top cut back so I can put the foam in to be trim. I forgot that this insulation foam works great, except you've got to dust it with Super 77, where it's going to be touched at least, because the paint just doesn't stick to it. And so now I've got a problem here where I think I'll have to rip those off and replace them with stuff that has had 77 on it, because I can't get it underneath the current paint that's on there. And I'm not going to meticulously clean the paint off Our roof is ready to be dry brushed on the front. I got it blacked out, but we're still scrubbing a piece of one. This is the trim here, the curtain that comes in above. It's actually scrubbing the hardware, so I'm just going to cover that with a piece of cardboard or something that it'll skate by and not grab hold of it. This thing I got cut all out, and we had that plywood delamination problem. I guess I still got to get the drips of construction adhesive out of there. I've got a little like patch, like a little outcrop piece that goes right here and obscures the wheel like that. And we had a student who's very talented in here doing the basing out the leaves and stuff. We're not sure yet whether we're going to put fabric material in there or not. So, but the trees are waiting for their dry brush along with Shrek's house, which we'll go see. The same student did these lovely panels of. I did these and sketched them out. I can't remember if I showed that, but I sketched them out in pencil. Made the two, and she painted us with a gradient here. They've got magnets on them, and I'll show you those. So those will stick to the base of the big columns when they're under the dragon's lair. Click, click. And I am going to put some fake grass across the front of Duloc, and I had toyed with the idea of a strip that would stick to the same place on those when they're in front of Duloc. I think it'll be okay if there's grass between them and the doors. I just wanted that perfect lawn kind of look of the fake grass, because they're talking about stay off the grass or whatever. And oh, here's the other bones over here on the other stage side. I don't know who's who, but they're a little bit smaller and a little bit different, but they're nice, and they'll stick up there and look really cool. And then the two different things stick to the side of those. So when the bones are at the bottom, we need shackles hanging down for the prisoners, and alternatively at the front of Duloc, these banners will go up on the towers instead. We've got signs that say Duloc here. So I'm going to put on the tower up as high as the shackles can be hung from, to where the actors can still get their hands in them and they look correct. I put a big 2-inch steel ring with a service link on. We got to get 2 on that one too. So there's 2 on here. They can just slip their hands in there. And so I'm going to come out of the tower. I keep looking for it, but it's laying down. I'm going to come out of the tower with a piece of dowel with a fender washer that's bigger in diameter. And so this ring, you can reach up, however they do it backstage when they set this thing with the bones on the bottom, and you can reach up and slip it over the fender washer, and then it'll hang there. Real nice, and the washer's kind of shiny, so it'll look like kind of a hardware post that sticks out of the tower. And so then I'll put like a 2-inch or even a 1.5-inch hole in each of these directly on center, and then that can go over the fender washer, and they can hang on that as well. And when you hang something from a centered point like that, it hangs plumb, which is nice. So we'll be able to put shackles and those banners on the towers, and the post that sticks off of them will look like some kind of shiny hardware, which is kind of cool. Like a real official thing, but it'll be the way that we hang it right in plain sight. Over here, in the case of the Fiona window, I just used one of those timber lock, ledge lock. I think they're real short, but I made sure that I had a central stud in this wall. And so when I went up and found it behind the paper with a magnet looking for the one screw that holds the luan on, I just ran it into the one stud, obviously put a big hole in the top of the window. I gotta wipe the window down, it's dusty, but obviously the other side is this one. And so you can just set that backstage, and when it stops swinging, it'll be plumb enough anyway. And that's how we'll do the quick change for the window. So, yeah, I guess you could say things are getting pretty serious around here. I don't think I've missed, where the hell is Shrek's house is on the other side of this thing. I gotta cover the window in the doorway with something maybe a little more substantial than this, maybe a piece of cardboard. And then I'm going to make some more bark texture and do it over the door, except for around the handle as well, right before we dry brush. And we'll dry brush all the light colored things. We'll spray all the light colored things and dry brush all the light colored things, whatever texture roll those, and then move that stuff out of the way. And then we'll get all the tree bark stuff in here, and we'll bring the roof in, and we'll get those muddy brown colors, and we'll get the dry brushing and texture effects onto those. And then we'll call it rock and roll. The bird, I'm going to cut this tube and install a short amount of it. I'm not going to be able to get his head to disappear. Anyway, I want to get farther out on the limb, but it'll be the tube with the head, and we'll come out the bottom with the string and turn, and we'll route along the branch through screw eyes with a longer piece of floss. And then I'll put the bottom half of it back over here on the post, and I'll adjust the floss length correctly. So as long as you lock in the two ends where it comes out of this to the trigger, I'm basically going to stretch this thing out and control it with, on the branch with screw eyes. That way, if there was some kind of failure, I figured they could reach up a little farther, and at least they can get a hold of the string and they can keep moving it. It could be bike cable and some other stuff that's more expensive, but I'm not going to bother with that. And then the hose, I'm going to cut and splice in a check valve that won't let the balloon deflate, and assemble this tightly with pipe dope out here, the drop ear to the bush down to that thing that I taped the balloon to, and get rid of this stupid filler end on this Harbor Freight balloon pump. We'll still use the pump itself. So I'll splice in a check valve back where you don't have to see it, and continue on with small hose and go into that thing out here where it's mounted. And then at least the balloon will blow up and stay. I'll build a little nest thing around it. We'll flat black out the little post under his head. I'll put a little yellow on his head and maybe a couple of feathers. It'll be a little yellow bird with a little golden stuff that comes raining down. You won't see the hand in anything, but a stage 2 version of that someday. And I could get the head to disappear and some other stuff, but it's just not going to be possible. I think that you could pivot it and still pull the string through the screw eyes. I think that little stalk with the head could tip down. It's just how to actuate that. It's just more complicated than I want to deal with right now. And then the fire has been tripped through and dropped and mishandled, and so I've got to rebuild the paper elements, the flame paper elements, with some new paper. But after that, it should be in good shape. I'm going to put a handle on it so they can get a hold of it. They keep trying to grab it by the paper. And when I was fixing the tissue paper, I had no choice but to use like Super 77. So other areas got sticky, and then people handling it started ripping again. It's just not working. Oh, and we got to get the fabric material down. At this point, I'm still thinking I'm going to try and make Duloc's tower grow. It's just a matter of time. And then that's all that we really have to do. Isn't that easy peasy? All right, I gotta go. See you later. All right, well, this is a little bit of cheating because opening night was last night and we finished everything up. I had 15 minutes to change my clothes and sit down and watch, and it went down pretty smoothly. No major problems. I just threw these 1-inch PVC pieces in now. I wanted to do this. It's in my original sketch, and I also want to put a lower loop in this thing. So I wanted to see how this looked. Now they're just on a screw, just measured up the same distance all the way around both sides, and threw a screw in roughly at the right angle or whatever. I'll probably replace that with one of those ledger locks. If I were to keep things like this, and just use a little gaff to clean this up. Actually, you can just eyeball, if you use a scribe and just scribe from, whatever the distance is of the point from the face here, and just set your scribe and go up and around like that. You can pull this off, cut it quick by hand with a Sawzall, something like this, and then put it back. And I could lop the bell end off of these pieces, and I probably would, so you didn't see. I send it to the back of this. From the front side, it's behind this upright, and from that other side, it's tucked way around here in the back. So in both cases, I would put that there, and in the front here, I just make a piece with it on the, as we look at it here, because any shorter and this falls lower, and right now it appears to make a complicated intersection behind, and it cleans that up, and as you move down, it becomes a little flatter, I think. And so I'm willing to live with that little hot spot shoulder that I don't think anybody will know, especially if it's painted black. So there's things like that. Anyway, if I were to go through it with a hole in each one of these to go around the bottom, then I can oversize the hole, and I will oversize the hole. Or in some cases, you could make a second hole or turn it into a pill shape, and the end of these would go down in there and just sit down in. But that compromises the integrity of this. So I wanted to look at this first, and then, because I don't even have to drill a hole in this case, and then look and see whether or not I want to send another piece of this stuff around. This was, I might, and that's the thing too, is what diameter. This diameter probably should be the fairest. I don't know if it's quite right to have it across the bottom also. So if that's 1 inch, And this is 1.25 inch. I probably put this around. I know it'll do this loop relatively easy, so in theory it would do this loop, and these are more robust now because they're controlled at the top and at the bottom. Anyway, all this thinking. I'll look at the rest of the set when we're totally finished. The bird worked well. I had to run out to Walmart last minute because I just couldn't make the routed string through the screw eyes work. We ended up needing bike cable, and so I went and got bike brake cable. They didn't offer anything at Walmart in the way of just a brake lever as well, like a kit with levers or whatever. So I just had them pulling on this, and then the plumbing is just the bike pump again, spliced into this little plastic. I painted it black, but it just looks like a fuel filter, but it's a Schrader valve or a check valve. So once the balloon is inflated, it takes quite a long time for it to lose pressure, and so they can inflate it right at intermission, and putting a finger in to protect it from the tack and make sure everything's just so. I wish I could show you what I did here. It's the same, basically, the drop ear. This just ended up being a piece of the pipe from the puppet, epoxy into a circle of plywood left over from the holes that I cut in the bases of the trees. There's the drop ear. Where is it? Drop ear to threaded to, I think, either barb or PEX, like I was saying, which stretches the balloon tight, and I went around with electrical tape as well. But into the back of the drop ear, that was a PEX drop ear. So I actually got a splice, 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch hose splice for putting two hoses together. And then I packed the PEX end of the drop ear full of epoxy putty and pushed the hose splice, which is barbed, into it until it stopped at the little collar in the middle where the two ends of it, center of the splice, until it stopped. And I was sure it was bedded in the epoxy putty. And then I actually reached through it with a wire and just cleaned out the little route for the air to go through and let the epoxy putty set up, thereby making a drop ear with a big diameter barb to stretch a balloon over coming up, and going out with 1/8 inch hose, which allowed me, like I say, to go all the way back. And that thing went 1/8 to 1/4 because it was 1/4 inch hose that came on the pump, but that's an easy enough transition to make. And so you just inflate the balloon and he's ready to rock and roll there. I filled the balloon with confetti, golden confetti, but what I also did today to add to the effect, I didn't realize, I couldn't get feathers into the balloon because the feathers were popping the balloon. But I can shred feathers and sprinkle them in the nest, so the pressure from the balloon pop, I think, will blow a few feathers out into the, to settle down, which makes it funny. That's what is the funny. So I got feathers. I got to find the yellow ones, and I also got the blender because I'll just hit them with 1 or 2 shots of the blender just to turn them into little feather particles or whatever. I want to put a little more moss across the top of Shrek's house. We got that stuff again. I'll look at the final set, but a few things I'm going to do today before tonight's show and Sunday's matinee, and then we'll do a full set breakdown and stuff, and maybe we'll even have footage of the show. I forgot to say, I would like to do a big crown molding. When everybody's standing up here above the cathedral, the window's at the right height in the wall, but I don't have enough. I want more wall. I want more height. And so I'd like to just do a big crown molding, or what looks like it up there. So I got this 8-inch sonotube. I'm just going to wrap a string around the outside, note the size, take it down and divide that length into quarters, and then wrap it around again and mark the quarter points on one end. And then I'll have to carefully send it through the table saw, trying not to clock it, and just cut each one of those points and try to make myself quarters. I could do the same layout the other side. I just have to make sure that the layouts aren't clocked to one another and snap lines. Anyway, I get myself 4 quarters cut out of this that are equal, because I'm going to need a couple of pieces to scarf together to do it. But then I get that quarter round hanging over that edge, and then I think the top of that edge I can put some smaller foam insulation type stuff across the top of it to catch. And that's the type of thing that I went around the window. I might do that around the window for the cathedral as well. I think I would paint that in though, on the tower. On the cathedral side, I went around the window with 1/2 pipe insulation, and you see how that adds. See that highlight? It just gives it more dimension. I wasn't able to set it down into a jam opening or trim it any more so than that. And I also wanted to go up these 2 corners with something, and it just gets out of control. So I'll do what I can today. In the case of this other side, I think the window needs something again. And if I used the same stuff, because it has to flip, I got to stay away from it enough to be able to flip and rehang it. But I might paint it the same color at least. And then you notice on the white Duloc stuff, we use the texture roller to catch highlight
see the blotchiness in here, which we don't have happening on this side. It makes it a little flat. So I might add a little white to this color and texture roll it, but I gotta stop talking and just see what I'm able to get done in a couple hours here. It's like almost 3 o'clock and we got call it 5:30 maybe or 6. All right, we'll see.